For the first time in his presidency, Donald Trump is not fighting Democrats. He is fighting members of his own party. This is not happening behind closed doors, not through anonymous leaks, and not through carefully worded statements meant to preserve plausible deniability. This is happening in public, on the Senate floor, through recorded votes, and through direct challenges to presidential authority grounded explicitly in the Constitution. Republican senators are standing up, casting votes against him, and drawing a line that says presidential power, even when exercised by their own party, has limits. This moment did not emerge from a single controversy. It was triggered by three developments colliding at once. First, Trump's repeated and explicit threats of military action against Greenland, a territory belonging to a NATO ally. Second, his declaration of a national emergency tied to Venezuelan oil assets, invoking extraordinary executive authority without clear urgency. And third, an escalating accountability crisis in which promised transparency has failed to materialize, oversight mechanisms appear stalled, and lawmakers are openly questioning whether commitments made by the administration were ever meant to be honored. Trump's response has followed a familiar pattern: profanity directed at dissenters, personal threats disguised as political warnings, demands for absolute loyalty framed as necessary unity. What is different this time is that the strategy is failing. The intimidation is not working, the votes are not reversing, and the institutional resistance is not fading quietly into the background. This is not just political drama or internal party conflict. It is a stress test of whether American power ultimately answers to law or to the instincts of a single individual. It is a test of whether constitutional guardrails still function when they become inconvenient to the president who is supposed to operate within them. To understand what is happening, it is important to start with the facts, clearly and without exaggeration. Last week, Republican senators joined Democrats to advance a war powers resolution. The phrase sounds technical, even obscure, but its purpose is straightforward. A war powers resolution is a legislative mechanism designed to limit the president's ability to use military force without congressional approval. It does not strip the president of all authority. It reasserts Congress's constitutional role in decisions that could place American forces in harm's way or trigger international conflict. This vote was not symbolic. It was not procedural theater. It passed with bipartisan support and sent a direct message to the White House. The president does not get to initiate military conflict unilaterally, especially when the potential target involves allied territory. Lawmakers were not responding to hypothetical fears or misinterpreted remarks. They were reacting to the president's own public statements in which he repeatedly floated the idea of military action against Greenland, not as satire, not as negotiation tactics, but as an option he described as real and under consideration. Greenland is not an unclaimed Arctic landmass. It is an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark is a founding member of NATO. NATO is not a loose alliance based on convenience. It is built on the principle of collective defense. Under Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, an attack on one member is considered an attack on all. That principle has been invoked exactly once in the alliance's history, after the September 11 attacks, when European nations stood with the United States. When an American president publicly suggests military action against Allied territory, the implications are not theoretical. Such rhetoric is constitutionally destabilizing and internationally explosive. It signals to allies that treaty commitments may be conditional, transactional, or subordinate to personal impulses. It signals to adversaries that alliance unity can be fractured through provocation and pressure. Republican senators understood this immediately. That is why they acted, and that is why the response from Trump was so personal and so aggressive. Senator Susan Collins, one of the Republicans who supported the resolution, reportedly received a direct call from the president following her vote. According to sources familiar with the exchange, the language was harsh and unmistakable in its intent. Support the president or face consequences, but she did not back down, and neither did other Republicans who crossed that line. Once lawmakers accept the political risk of defying a president from their own party, the leverage shifts. Backing down does not restore safety. It only confirms weakness. That reality explains why this moment feels different. The fear barrier has already been crossed. At the same time this war powers confrontation was unfolding, another development received far less attention but carries equally profound implications. Trump declared a national emergency tied to Venezuelan oil assets, invoking sweeping executive powers that allow the administration to centralize control, bypass congressional debate, and act unilaterally across multiple policy domains. On the surface, the justification sounds plausible. Venezuela possesses vast oil reserves. Securing energy resources, reducing dependence on hostile regimes, and protecting American interests are familiar arguments. But the details tell a different story. Venezuela's oil infrastructure has been decimated by decades of mismanagement, corruption, sanctions, and underinvestment. Restoring meaningful production would take at least a decade and require tens of billions of dollars in capital. This raises an obvious question that has not been adequately addressed. Who actually benefits from this emergency declaration? It is not American consumers, who will not see immediate price relief. It is not American workers, whose wages will not rise because of long-term extraction projects in politically unstable environments. The primary beneficiaries would be multinational energy corporations with the capital, expertise, and global reach to operate in such conditions. Their profits do not necessarily translate into broad-based economic gains at home. The timing of the emergency declaration matters. It was not declared during a sudden supply shock or immediate crisis. It was announced amid mounting pressure over war powers, oversight failures, and internal party dissent. Emergencies have a powerful political function. They consolidate authority. They narrow decision-making. They allow presidents to bypass legislative scrutiny under the justification of urgency. Trump has relied on emergency powers repeatedly throughout his political career: border wall funding, pandemic responses, trade restrictions, now energy assets. Each invocation lowers the threshold for what qualifies as an emergency. Each use expands the scope of unilateral executive action, and Republicans are beginning to recognize the pattern. The uncomfortable truth is that emergency powers do not disappear when administrations change. They are inherited. The authority normalized today becomes the baseline tomorrow. Every lawmaker who votes to expand presidential power must confront a simple question. Would they be comfortable if the next president from the opposing party wielded the same authority in the same way? That realization is reshaping Republican calculations in real time. Overlaying both the war powers dispute and the emergency declaration is a third crisis that has been building quietly but persistently: accountability. Trump campaigned heavily on transparency. He made explicit promises regarding the release of classified documents. He framed disclosure as a defining issue and suggested personal involvement in ensuring it happened. Expectations were deliberately set high. Months into his term, the results do not match the rhetoric. Deadlines have slipped. Reviews have stalled. Inspector General processes appear bogged down. Senators such as Sheldon Whitehouse have publicly questioned why promised disclosures have not occurred and why statutory timelines are being missed. These concerns are not framed as conspiracy theories. They are framed as procedural failures. Process failures matter because they reveal intent. When commitments are sincere, systems are built to fulfill them. When commitments are performative, delays become the norm and explanations grow vague. Oversight exists precisely to distinguish between the two. This is where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Each time oversight pressure intensifies, external drama escalates, war rhetoric grows louder, emergency declarations multiply, the news cycle floods with new controversies, attention is diverted, accountability questions are buried under spectacle. This is not accidental. It is a strategy that has been used consistently for decades. Flood the zone, exhaust critics, make sustained focus impossible, but Congress is not an audience. It is a co-equal branch of government. It has subpoena power, budget authority, institutional memory, and some Republicans are remembering that their role is not merely to defend a president, but to defend the structure that outlasts any presidency. This is why the current revolt is not driven by ideology or partisan gain. It is driven by institutional self-preservation. Lawmakers are recognizing that if they do not enforce limits now, those limits may not exist when they are most needed. For many Americans, discussions of war powers and emergency declarations can feel abstract. Constitutional theory does not pay the grocery bill, but the consequences of concentrated power are not abstract. They reach directly into everyday life. American families are watching a president threaten military action against allies, while inflation remains stubbornly high and household costs have not fallen as promised. Voters were drawn by assurances of economic stability and restraint abroad. Instead, they see rhetoric that increasingly resembles contingency planning for conflict. Foreign policy instability translates into domestic economic risk. Markets react to uncertainty. Retirement accounts absorb volatility. Emergency powers that bypass Congress diminish public input into decisions that shape national priorities. These effects are cumulative, not immediate, but they are real. Small business owners depend on predictability. They need stable trade relationships, consistent regulatory environments, and reliable alliances. When the president threatens allied territory, uncertainty spikes. Investment plans stall, long-term contracts become riskier, supply chains adjust cautiously, often away from American partners. Consider a manufacturing firm exporting to Europe. If NATO credibility erodes, European partners diversify suppliers. The shift is gradual, not dramatic, but it costs contracts, jobs, and revenue over time. Damage accrues quietly, long after headlines fade. Large corporations face different calculations. Energy firms may see opportunity in Venezuela, but only if political stability endures for decades. Defense contractors worry that alliance fractures undermine the collective security frameworks that drive procurement. Financial institutions price in governance risk, which raises the cost of capital. Those costs are passed to consumers. Internationally, recalibration is already underway. European defense officials are quietly reassessing contingency plans. Canadian leaders are watching Arctic security dynamics shift. Asian allies are questioning the reliability of American commitments if Atlantic alliances weaken. Adversaries are paying close attention. Russian state media has amplified Trump's Greenland comments as evidence of American imperialism. China is monitoring potential openings to expand influence in Europe. Iran is assessing whether emergency power escalation signals a president more likely to overreach. Perhaps the most damaging effect is erosion of institutional trust. When Congress must invoke war powers against its own president, when emergencies become routine, and when oversight fails to deliver transparency, faith in governance declines across the political spectrum. This erosion is not partisan. Conservatives fear unaccountable power. Liberals fear executive overreach. Everyone else sees chaos. Constitutional scholars describe this moment as a stress test of checks and balances. National security professionals express alarm at the casual deployment of military threats. Economists warn that unpredictability functions as a hidden tax on growth, slowing investment and hiring without making headlines. Looking ahead, the pressures are clear even if outcomes are uncertain. In the next several months, Republican resistance is likely to intensify. The war powers vote signaled a willingness to challenge executive authority that has been absent for years. Oversight demands will expand. Legal challenges to emergency powers will move forward. Trump will almost certainly escalate. Dissent will be framed as sabotage. Loyalty tests will harden. But once lines are crossed, retreat becomes harder. Lawmakers who have already defied the president have little incentive to reverse course. Markets will remain volatile. NATO will plan quietly for scenarios that were once unthinkable. Voters will continue comparing the presidency they were promised with the presidency they are witnessing. Over the longer term, the question is whether institutions hold, whether Congress maintains discipline, whether courts can adjudicate emergency power disputes without becoming partisan battlegrounds, whether voters can distinguish governance from spectacle. If resistance holds, this moment could mark a genuine rebalancing of power. If it collapses, precedents will be set that shape American governance for generations. International damage, once done, will take years to repair. The core takeaway is simple. Republicans are pushing back not out of disloyalty, but out of alarm. War powers, emergency declarations, and accountability failures are colliding, forcing lawmakers to choose between party loyalty and institutional survival. This is not about who wins the next news cycle. It is about whether the rules that govern power remain stronger than the individuals who hold it. Democracy does not protect itself. It depends on people willing to defend it when doing so is inconvenient, uncomfortable, and politically risky. That defense is happening now. Whether it succeeds depends on whether enough people are paying attention.